Hello, everyone. Jeffrey Tefertiller, Service Management Leadership Podcast with Rob Akershoek. We thank Rob for the first episode. We covered a lot of ground. So now we're going to talk practicality. If history has taught us anything, we talked about a lot of different frameworks, Rob, right? From SAFe, DevOps. There's going to be something else coming. It may even be DevOps Part 2 or SAFe Part 2. Do you have any ideas how these frameworks will evolve or which ones may come on?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the past and the future, there's probably some lines where you could see, oh yeah, this is what's going to happen, right? So typically you see like some new frameworks appearing from large IT organizations with a good experience, like Google as an example with site reliability engineering. So it could be like maybe those companies like an Amazon and Google, they say, hi, we got something, or the Spotify model is also coming from that. There's a kind of good practices coming from large organizations that have experienced this. So I think innovation typically comes from those organizations that they leverage something. Now, what you would assume the coming years is you have like your foundational practices. You could argue those are been stable for the last few years, but have been modified, like ITIL, for example, or service management in general. It's still there and still there to stay because we still manage services, right? We see now DevOps, but we see also agile development. We can see scaled agile frameworks appearing, but they're all around a similar type of topics. We develop, test, deploy, and manage services, right? But so I think that will stay and modify, like your DevOps version 2 or something, or they call it DevSecOps or BizSec DevOps, right? It's all in, if you think about what we do, we still do the same. We develop, test, deploy, monitor, right? So it's not that much changing. But where I see a lot of changes happening is in one area is specific areas like cloud, for example. I can imagine that for cloud management, there will be more practices with like guidance that will tell you really how to get this hybrid cloud under control. And it's maybe not prescriptive, but more for how you should do that. For example, tagging is an example in the cloud, right? If there's more like standards that because we talk about standards in that case, can we realize standards that different vendors will adopt that will help me to improve my IT services? So I think in those areas, I hope some areas there are improvement. So for example, cloud, but also Internet of Things. I assume we get some standards out there, and based on the standard, we got new practices, because we didn't talk about it, but we have models like SAFe and scaled agile frameworks. They're not really standards, right? They're just practice, and ITIL the same. But there are standards in the market coming that maybe that a consortium of organizations will say, this is how we manage Internet of Things. This is how we manage cloud. This is how we manage, for example, a for example, integration with multiple vendors, like brokering. Because that is still challenging, right? If I order a service from one vendor, there's no standard that I can adhere to. So I think hopefully in that areas, there will be some practices coming along. But I don't think it's that dramatic change, right? But a lot of times it's a dramatic new name. But and for example, site reliability engineering is an example of that. And I'm not sure how well people know that, but you could conceptually say site reliability engineering, SRE, is a practice that suddenly is very hyped today, and is really about, conceptually, you could say, how do we make operations activities, repeatable tasks, automate, simplify, and manage that? Because we've never been able to do that, right? To make, let's say, monitoring or automated remediation, all those repetitive things, deployment, monitoring, typically we're not good at that. And then you could say, let's solve that. And site reliability engineering is, for example, a practice to facilitate that. And I can imagine that those areas I expect more, like, for example, for reliability, or because we talk about today more and more about how do we improve our reliability or zero outage. So I expect in areas like that some improvement, but they're probably more into practices and how to apply it than a real framework. For example, AI and machine learning, I would assume in the market that we get some more traction on how to use AI in your IT organization, but we don't have a good practice today how that can be leveraged, right? So hopefully there is like maybe a AI for IT kind of a method coming in where you can apply that. I think risk and compliance is an area where I believe there's a lot of going on where I still don't see a good fundamental framework in the market at this moment that can do that, right? Embedding security and compliance in your development, your testing, so that's an area where I think significantly value will be added. So hopefully those practices will appear as well. And of course, if you think about it more broadly, we talk about IT management today, really about a technical building capability, like building, testing, application services. But think about low code, for example, and where business process as code is defined, just as an example. So then business maybe is in control to modify some of our changes. They're not going through a source code repository, but conceptually they do, but they're more like business as code. So you could imagine that changes the way we develop, right? That the business can modify things and deploy that, and we test them by AI or whatever, and then we can deploy that. So I think that will change the way we do as well. Yeah, because, and maybe hopefully in the future, because today IT is still, although we have a lot of maturity nowadays in frameworks, we still have a lot of fragmented backlogs. If you think about work in IT, because one thing that's very essential is how we manage work in IT. And a lot of frameworks talk about the work, but they don't call it like that, but it's really about the backlogs and the queues. So we have incident, problem, changes, request, development backlogs, epic stories, features. We maybe have demands, we have risk assessment, all this work. Now, today, they're all managed in different ways. We got our backlog tools, we got our service management system. So maybe in the future, we say, hey, they're all work items, and we have a work management system for IT. But we don't have that today, but and because it's really challenging today to manage all that work in IT. And of course, then automate things, right?
That's a lot. That's a lot. And, you know, as new technology comes on, I think it's going to drive those other frameworks in the development. And we get back to that leadership of somebody knowing how they're stitched together. I think that's the underlying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Somebody at the top that says, I get you want to do this, and you want to do this, you want to do this. Let's figure out how to do it to fit our business needs.
Yeah, I think you cover a key point there, Jeffrey, because it's not about a new framework and say, let's do that, right? Hopefully we should not do that. It's really about that somebody, and not somebody, a team of people sit together and say, how does that end-to-end IT, call it the digital operating model, looks like? And how does that fit together? If we have a solid idea of how that all should work together, then you have a good foundation, and then you can plot, okay, new practices. But it's not how we do it today. Suddenly, we have site reliability engineering, and then somebody says, oh yeah, we should implement it. And then people say, okay, how do we do that? And then we start working on it. We create a team, a site reliability team. What about, why? But they're starting to do that with good intentions and good for experimentation. But it's not how we should. Of course, for experimentation you should use, but it's not how we should improve IT. We should really go back and say, look at the bigger picture, as we said last time, Jeffrey. You need to understand the bigger picture and then have that oversight, and then start to think, where can we, because DevOps and ITIL and IT for IT is safe probably needs to be blended together in some way or another.
Oh, yes.
And the only way to do it is to have a kind of co-create. There's also a nice ITIL word, right? You have to co-create this end-to-end value stream with all these practices together with all these different stakeholders, and that's what we need to do. And that can only be done, unfortunately, and is having a strong leadership and say, this is what we should do. Because I can assure you it will not happen if we just leave every team doing their own thing, right? Because everybody has their own agenda. The SAP team says, we now do this, and the technology team network does that. And so everybody has their own agenda. But we need to combine all those initiatives to create this end-to-end optimized, let's say, delivery model.
Oh, yeah.
Which is challenging because agile people would say, no, I can determine how my backlogs because my team is independent, right? And we need to have we could implement their own ways of working. And it's good to test yourself in your own organization. A lot of organizations have Jira or Azure DevOps as a backlog tool, right? Where we maintain our, let's say, development stories and epics and features. But if you zoom into how people actually use that, it's very differently done for all these different teams. They have maybe many different type of issue types there, and there's no standard out there. And because of a lacking of a standard, it sounds so simple, but then it's also difficult to communicate value to the customers. If there's an issue, how do we send it to the right team? It's much more a problem because we don't have a good data fabric defined in our IT organization. And that's what we talked about last time as well, right? That the data fabric in IT is very essential. And it's about your work items in IT, the epics, the incidents, the changes. It's about config, the contract, the licenses. How do you make that link together? And then back in the traceability, right?
But sometimes you get too much. I don't want, we'll move on, but sometimes we get too much data in today's world, and we don't know what to do with it because we're like, data. You know what I mean? We think it's like money. The more, the better.
Yeah, that's another challenge, of course. We got in many areas, and that's with IT management. We have in many areas too much, and in most cases, too less, right? So we got a lot of data, so no doubt about that. We have enough data. We have even too much data in IT. If you think about logs and monitoring data and tests and documents, right? Not to forget all those documents nobody reads. You're right. In general, we have too much data. And that's where the challenge is. If we then say, no, we need this because this is essential, then they say, oh, more data. I say, no, not more, less data, but more better data and more effective data. So, but that's a challenge indeed, because they say, oh, that sounds another administration, right? We talked about solving the contracts, the CMDB, there's maybe service portfolio. Oh, they said, no, all that data. Come on, guy. We need to do some work here. We need to deliver value to our customers. Don't bother about these administrations, right? They don't add value. And I can say, well, it's your backbone. It will deliver your value. But if you don't have this up to date, it will cost you. But you're right. We have too much data, but we now need to simplify that by standardizing some of that data model, if you will, or an information model for IT. And you can do a test yourself in your own IT organization, just for fun, and to say, what data do we manage in our IT organization? Just an exercise. And this picture on the background shows that. It's just to, what is my data that I have in my IT organization? So from on the other side, the portfolio side is about demands, my projects, my architecture. In the middle, it's about development stories and then contracts and license, and then just try to plot, okay, how do we manage that today? And then you see how gradually you're starting to see how terrible we manage IT and data in IT. And because we manage data bad in IT, that has an impact of a lot of things. Because if there's one thing that is more stable in a sense of practices, is data. Because incident is still an incident, and it has been there for the last 15 or 20 years. The same maybe for an epic, we call it now differently. In the past, requirement or a work item, and now it's called an epic story feature, but it's actually the same. It's a task, it's work. And contracts are still there. So a lot of concepts have been there for a long time, and it's really stable. So if you solve this, you have a stable foundation to continuously improve. And it's not about ITIL or IT4IT or skilled agile framework. It's really about what is the real essence of IT, right? So, yeah.
What is it we're trying to do? So we've talked about a lot. Last question, teeing you up. Nice, easy, well, not that easy question. We've talked about a lot of change coming, merging frameworks, doing a lot of things. And we would both agree you're not going to do it in the big bang. You're not going to be able to.
No, it's not possible
to do it that way. So it's going to be incremental change. How do you suggest organizations take the first step? How do they make these
right
incremental change?
Yeah, and I think it's not that complicated, right? So, but we have to make sure that we don't think we already know everything. So let me start with the conversation of that most organizations have plenty of topics to do to improve their IT, right? So you can easily find 20 or 30 initiatives. Just to mention something, we need to do security management, we need to do monitoring improvement, we have the CMDB, of course, we need to migrate our service management platform to the cloud, we need to transition our old-fashioned PPM system to a modern portfolio backlog. Oh yeah, we need to implement license management. Oh yeah, and also contract management. Oh yeah, and financial management. There's, you name it, there's an initiative. And DevOps, continuous delivery, not to forget, deployment, release orchestration, whatever. There's enough initiatives. But what you really need to try to say, now there is a simpler way to do this. Forget all this on this initiative, but start with, and as I mentioned that, of course, before, co-create with the key stakeholders in the organization. So step one is identify the key stakeholders in your organization that have something to say about this end-to-end delivery model. So it's probably somebody from architecture that really have a good point of that. Portfolio management, service management, security, risk management, business. the development leads, yeah, and sit together and say, how does that end-to-end delivery model should look like? And you can use IT for IT as a reference architecture as to start off with, right? But I think that's the step one. Get those people together with all these different views on the entire delivery chain, because that's what we talked about. IT management is complex. Just accept that. And the only way to get an end-to-end picture is get those people with the different expertise, co-create that end-to-end picture. Just start simple and say, how do we run IT today? It's not very sexy, of course, to tell your executives, now we figured out how we run IT today, but also try to plot, this is how we should want to run, and not to high level of detail, but just very high level. Like, how do we get new demands in? How do we decide even where to prioritize? How do we manage backlogs in general and get a vision? Because we don't have a shared vision. And if everybody's not on the same page, then you will not succeed, because everybody goes their own direction. So you need to create almost like a one pager, maybe an A3, a big page, and say, this is why we want, how we see the world in a digital operating model. And then it should cover enough details about high level value streams, capabilities. And then we could say, okay, let's see how we run that today. With which tools do we have out there? What teams are involved? And then you're starting to assess and say, where are the areas where I can improve? So one of the things you can do is, once you have this people together, co-create a kind of a picture, then you do a value stream analysis. And it sounds very obvious because everybody talks about it, but really understand how value is flowing to IT organization. Just follow a demand. How is a team enabled? What are the impediments? So it's just to do a very simple high-level value stream analysis and plot all the issues and challenges. So you build a kind of a picture, call it a heat map, and say, this is where all our challenges are. And a lot of people would say, but I knew those challenges. And say, yes, you knew them, but now you can plot them to the end-to-end picture. And now you can prioritize them, because otherwise you implement always something that people were shouting or more sexy to implement, like monitoring or whatever. So now you need to create this picture of all those improvement opportunities on this background of, let's say, your delivery model. And then you're starting to say, okay, let's start maybe some hackathons where we can bring teams together and say, let's solve this problem. You need to be creative there, or design sprints. But what you could do, and I see that work a lot, very well, is you have this high level picture with the key stakeholders identified. You have a stakeholder map for IT management, which we didn't have before. Right. So who is the key on continuous delivery? Who's the key on service management? All those stakeholders. And then you say, let's take one or two streams or two business applications, and we're going to implement this end-to-end value stream from demand to production and solve it for those 3, 4, 5 applications or services. And they will be the pathfinder. And then you say, hey, this is going to work. We demonstrate the value. We show that this new ways of working is successful. And then we onboard other teams to this new way of working. Because you don't want to implement a test management capability or monitoring. No, what you want to do is implement a very lean, agile, let's say, value stream from demand to production, let's say, for 1 or 2 business applications. Maybe the applications that are, one is SaaS, one is running on Azure, and one is a package-based. Yeah, you have 3 types of patterns you want to implement, and you solve and you look at how do we manage the backlogs for them? How do we do deployment for them? And then you cannot solve everything for them in way one, but you can at least say, this is how things connect. But try to look at the bigger picture. Don't try to solve impediments for one team, for one specific technology, but more like end to end. For example, test. We don't need to test automate everything yet. Well, we can at least make sure that it's traceable, and we do some test automation, but we also have to do some deployment automation, and we also do some monitoring for that application. So summarizing, what you need to do is identify those people in your organization, bring them together, build this nice end-to-end picture, how we run IT today, envision a target state, select a number of applications, a SaaS one, a package-based, something else, follow how we do it today, and then implement some examples how it should be done. And what should be done is very complex, because then you take, let's say, a business application, you say, okay, how do we do deployment for this application correctly? How we make sure that CMDB is updated for this application correctly? How we make sure that monitoring is done exactly? How do we do security testing for this on? So you try to solve the small things for this only one application, and then you figure out, oh, that's complex, but at least there is a way to start working, and that becomes your pathfinder for success.
Wow. Wow, yeah. That's a lot. And so what I heard you, let me summarize very high level. Figure out where you are today, where you want to be, do a gap analysis, and then put a plan together to try to implement that on an end-to-end basis for different test models or value tests.
Yeah, I think you summarized it very, very well. And the key on is end-to-end. So you don't implement fragmented improvements, but try to solve it for the end-to-end value stream first and demonstrate, because otherwise you'll be month implementing a CMDB improvement while you could say, no, let's fix it for these 2 or 3 applications, how this should work, the service models, what information should we really need, how do we solve the monitoring for that specific application, and so on and so on. And then you need to make it repeatable. But that's the real challenge, make it repeatable. And yeah.
Oh yeah, that's tough. Rob, you've been a great guest. Thank you for taking out your time. I appreciate you sharing all your knowledge with us.
Yeah, Jeffrey, thank you very much. I enjoyed this conversation a lot. So really thank you for this opportunity. And also I'd like to thank to the audience that listening or watch this. Thank you very much. And again, as I mentioned last time, enjoy your digital journey and make it a good 2021.
Oh, we try. Thanks, Rob.
All right.
And we'll be right back with Jeffrey's closing thoughts.
Hello, everyone. This is Jeffrey back with closing thoughts for our second episode with Rob Akershoek. You thought I was going to mispronounce it, didn't you? I didn't, I hope. Well, we're back with these closing thoughts on part 2 of this discussion with Rob. And there are just 3 minor things I want to bring up as we close out this discussion. One is enterprise service management is going to look very different in a few years than it does today. Today, we think of enterprise service management as taking service management principles and applying them to portfolio, to human resources, to facilities, things of that nature. That's great. Now, that's going to be woven into what we think of as IT service management, and we all know that's coming. But the other shift that is coming is the incorporation of traditionally non-IT configuration items, and they're going to be feathered into this landscape. And so, for example, a bank, they're ATMs, non-traditional IT equipment, but we're going to care about the relationships and all the things that we care about in configuration items. Hospitals with technology in the rooms, educational facilities, think about all the technology that we see everywhere. That's going to be layered in a way that we haven't seen ever. And that's coming very quickly. That's number 1. Number 2 is there are many forms of agile that we are going to try to layer into this service management model. And so be thinking strategically of how do we do this? How do we use agile for what it's great at with delivery and making sure teams are accountable, they're on a cadence, they're taking small incremental steps. How do we incorporate that into our service management? That is something that many organizations are struggling with today and will be tomorrow and the next day. And lastly, and this is third, and we talk about it a little bit with Rob, history has taught us nothing else. It's that these frameworks will continue to grow and there'll be new frameworks, and a company, an organization has to have a plan on how to incorporate these. And the reason I say this, I've been places, and I'm not going to name names, right, where the flavor of agile is determined by the vendor that's supporting that tool. That's not a comprehensive organizational view of that flavor of agile. And the same will be true of service management on how we define service management. So it's up to each organization to help define that for themselves. And we at Service Management Leadership can help you walk down that path. And there are many other very good people that can do it as well. But have that thought process of how do we, knowing everything is changing rapidly, how do we get a big picture view and stay current? Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Rob for joining us for this 2-part series. We wish you to have a great, great day, and thank you very much. Bye.